Good Wednesday morning. Welcome to the beginning of the Word. Today we'll be looking at Philippians chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, making request for you all with joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. Paul begins coming out of the introduction or sort of the salutation, which is pretty formal. He comes into a prayer for them. And notice he says, I thank God upon every remembrance of you. Notice here that it's every remembrance that causes him to give thanks. So he remembers them and he thinks about them. When Paul considers his time there, he's just full of rejoicing for what happens there. And this says two things. First, it says something about their relationship that they have with one another, in that it's close and that he cares about them. But it also says similarly something about Paul's prayer life. It says that Paul had a heart for prayer. Paul, whenever he looked at them, he thought, I've got to express these good feelings to God. How many people are there that when you think about them, boom, you're filled with good feelings about them? You know, there's several people that I have like this, but there's few that I have that I'm just like, yes, they're so wonderful. This tells them that there's a very special relationship in what they do. And then the other thing, as we mentioned here, is that this means that Paul obviously has some sort of prayer reflex, we might say. Obviously, they fill him with joy. Notice here, this remembrance fills him with joy. But this says something about the way that Christ has shaped his mind and his heart, is that when he's glad, when he's filled with joy, he directs that to God with thanksgiving. And we should consider carefully if we have such a reflex, that when we're filled with joy, when we're filled with gladness, that brings about in us thanksgiving. What thoughts, sort of understanding do we have when we experience a blessing? Does it immediately go with thanks to God? Or does it go with praise to self or some other thing? Where is God in that picture? With Paul, God is centrally in the picture in this joy that he has because of them. All right, so next we read that always in every prayer of mine. All right, so notice we got these words here. These are the same here. We got the word every and the word every. Every remembrance and then every prayer. These two go together. He makes the request here, once again, we see, with joy. As we see next time, Paul has confidence. And even though there are places they need to grow and be developed, he can make this request with joy in every single prayer because he's sure that they're going to rise to the task. They have a proven track record of faithfulness. So when Paul prays for them to grow, you might say he recognizes the fact that they're lacking in some way, but he knows they're going to rise to the task. He knows they'll grow and that they'll be blessed by it. So as he prays, making requests for them, as there's things in there that need to change that he recognizes, he's able to do that with joy because of his confidence in them. And then we come to part of the reason for his joy. Part of the reason for his thanksgiving is this word fellowship. This fellowship in the gospel. Why? Where? From the first day until now. From the first day until now, they've had this fellowship in the gospel here. So what's that reason for joy and confidence? As we continue on to look through this word fellowship. And this is a word that I think we can get so comfortable with that we forget or never truly look into what it means. Because oftentimes we think about fellowship as the good feeling that Christians have towards each other. And indeed, that's permeates this text. There's a love that is infused in this. We might think of this as an air of social agreeability. However, at least in this letter, fellowship has a very specific meaning, and that it refers to working together. It refers to cooperation to advance a common goal. It's about being on the same team, doing complementary things for an ultimate purpose. And again, this notion of fellowship that Paul is going to come back to. In this letter, fellowship often really refers to financial support. If you look back in chapter 4, Paul is going to mention fellowship, and it's going to refer to the fact that they helped to support and made a specific contribution to his needs. And that's kind of what he's saying is here in this first day until now, you guys have been supporting me, and you guys are continuing to do that, and I appreciate it. I think there's a good chance that the what we call the occasion of the letter, or the reason why it's being written, and the circumstances that caused it to be writing, at least as in part, is that he's received this this gift from them. They've supplied him, and he wants to come back and to show them how thankful he is. This is, in some sense, an extended thank you note with some encouragement and some admonition along the way, and that makes sense as to why he's beginning to talk about this at the very beginning here, to recognize, hey, this is why I'm writing. So what are we to make of all this? Well, Paul has joy for the Philippians, and he can be joyful for them and thank God for them in spite of the serious challenges they're going to face, because as you get into the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4, there's some doozies. There's some doozies, but his tone is absolutely positive about it. Everything is not perfect in the Philippian church. There's hard things to deal with, but Paul is going to dive off in joyful prayer and begin with a word of thanks because he knows what's going to happen. He knows that they're going to respond to it. And as you think about your fellow Christians, people you go to church with, I want to encourage you to begin with that spirit of thanksgiving. I want to encourage you to pray for your fellow Christians and to pray for their growth and pray for the places they need to change, but also pray with thanksgiving for the grace of Christ in them. Be thankful for the work that has already happened. Be thankful for the good things. And even if they haven't been perfected, a posture of thanksgiving towards them, a posture of thanking God and having joy towards them is going to allow you to view and intercede them with a heart of compassion rather than a heart of pride and judgment and condemnation. Instead of you being the standard of, I have all the right answers and I know what I'm doing and they need to just conform to what I think they ought to do, begin with thankfulness so you can see who they are and where they're at and the glory of what God has done for them along the way. Thank you so much for joining us here today at Beginning the Word. It's our prayer that just as you've begun today in the Word of God, you'll live out today in the Word of God.